independent producers organization live showcase. And today we have an edition to do with overpopulation, and I have a call in from Frosty Wooldridge. Let me introduce him. He's bicycled across 6 continents, from the Arctic to the South Pole, as well as 8 times across the United States, coast to coast and border to border. In 2005, he bicycled from the Arctic Circle, Norway to Athens, Greece. In 2012, he bicycled coast to coast across America. He presents the coming population crisis facing America and what to do about it. And it can't possibly be anything more important than this. Frosty, are you there?
I certainly am, Richard. I'm really happy to be with you and all listeners, not only across the Northwest, but across America and Canada. So I'm excited about a conversation today that's most left out in the mainstream media, and that's the crisis that America faces as it is about to add 138 million more people within the next 34 years.
People just don't realize how serious this is. I've got a newspaper here. I know you can't see it. It's a local paper, the Tribune, and it's got a thing here. It says, "City choked by traffic and congestion." And I'm not trying real hard to get it, so everybody just trust me, that's what it says. A city choked by traffic and congestion. Frosty, can you imagine what might be causing that?
Well, let me really bring this home to those who have not heard about this in the past. We right now in the United States, just in the last 45 years, added 100 million people. And that was jumping our population from 194 million back in 1963, when the 1965 Immigration Reform Act manifested through Howard Metzenbaum and Jacob Javits and Teddy Kennedy back in 65. They then started immigrating into the country. Instead of 175,000 people per year, they started immigrating 1.2 million per year. And by 2006, that jumped our population to 300 million. Right now, at the growth rate of 3.1 million per year, we're on course to jump from the 300 million in 2006 to 438 million people by 2050. That's only 34 years from now.
Yeah.
That means, in real terms, we're going to double the populations of our 35 most populated cities. So New York City will jump from 8.3 million to 16.6 million. Chicago, Illinois, from 5 million to 10 million. Los Angeles, from 11 million to 22 million. The state of Florida is now projected to grow from 18 million to 36 million. And please, dear listener, fellow American, Canadian, and world traveler, we are already with 7 states that are in water shortages, starting off with Florida and Georgia and Texas and New Mexico and Arizona and Nevada, and obviously California is in an exceptional drought, and yet California is on course again to add 20 million more people, and 98% of that population gain will come from legal and illegal immigration. So the goal here, Richard, is to create a national discussion and debate on where we want to take our civilization, how we want to hand it over to future generations. And of course, my thrust and my theme throughout all of this is to shut down all immigration into the United States, help those people in their own countries, because the fact is the third world continues to grow at 80 million net gain, new babies every year, and thus they're not doing anything about their birth rates. So we need to take some action on our own in order to survive and actually thrive as a viable and sustainable civilization. I hope that sets the stage for this evening's conversation.
That's right. We have people like even Syria, especially Syria, because it really bothers a lot of people. Why can't they do this over there in their country. I don't know how they can be, so many people can be chased out by just a few guys with guns or whatever they have over there, but they should stay there and try to make the most out of that country. They've been doing it all this time, right up to now. So what happens all of a sudden now that they can't stay there in their country and make it work? Why do I have so many refugees have to be traveling to the, Spain, Germany, France, all those countries?
That's correct. And the reality is this, and I really want this to really sober each listener. Africa right now has 1.1 billion people. 1.1, B as in boy, 1.1 billion people. And by 2050, the United Nations projections for population show that Africa will reach 2 billion people because they simply will not engage family planning or birth control. And before the end of the century, which is only 84 years from now, which is the life of an American citizen about, they will hit 4 billion. So, in other words, they're not taking care of their responsibilities. And even with civil war, we had a civil war. We didn't have our own people racing off to other countries. We dealt with our civil war inside our country. And so at some point, no matter what, Syria and any of the citizens in all of the countries of Africa are going to have to deal with their birth rates and their own internal wars, because if they don't, and we continue to take on all of these immigrants, whether it's humanitarian or otherwise, we will then suffer the same consequences of an overloaded society with people fighting amongst themselves for water and energy and resources. So we have to ask ourselves, is this the path that we want to take? And as a world traveler, as you have seen on my bio, having bicycled across 6 continents and actually 11 times across the United States, traveled all over the world, I've already seen what has occurred in the world, and I'm really inviting all Americans and every person listening to raise your voice, and I'll give you some organizations from which you can do that in order to create this national debate, because I'm trying to get on 60 Minutes, I'm trying to get on Charlie Rose, I'm trying to get on NPR with Robert Siegel, I'm trying to get on TED Talks. And the key is that we've got to raise our voices. This is a constitutional republic. It doesn't wait for you to sit around and say nothing or do nothing. You have to take action in order to change the course of history. And so that's the reason for our discussion tonight.
What do they tell you when you call the radio and television stations? Do they say that people don't want to hear about not reproducing, or what specifically are they trying to get over to you as to why they don't want to do it?
Well, as a matter of fact, there is a national taboo on the topic of human overpopulation, especially here in the United States.
Right.
But the fact is, we are the 3rd fastest growing country in the world, behind China, which adds 8 million people net gain per year, even with a 1 child per family. And India, at 1.25 billion, adds 16 million people every single year net gain. And they will overcome China by the mid-century. But here, just like in India, there's no conversation, because there are other people with a different mindset, and those are the corporate heads, those are the power elites, those are the Catholic Church, that's the Islamic Church. And all of those entities want and expect and actually hope for endless immigration and more population so that they can create more growth in the industries, more car sales, more home sales, but they neglect to understand that this is a finite planet with finite resources, and that at some point it all comes down kind of like Humpty Dumpty off the wall and shatters, and that's what kind of a civilization we're working for right now. And those people with those kinds of mindsets need to have their mindsets changed by the action of we, the educated citizens of America. Otherwise, we're all facing the same thing that happened to the Roman Empire. Certainly for those of you who know about Easter Island was a finite area, and it collapsed after its citizens kept exponential growth going for centuries. and then the Mayan, the Mayan civilization there in Mexico, Central America, also collapsed. And when you see all these ruins, those are the ruins of overpopulated, unsustainable societies, and we are headed in the same direction at a gallop because of mass immigration.
China, of all the things that you just talked about, China really sticks out in my mind because 120-mile gridlock, can the people not know? Hey, there must be a problem. There's too many of us. What do we do? I mean, they don't even comment about that.
Well, they certainly don't, and they're just like we are. They don't have an answer, but what they keep doing is building more lanes. And if any of you have seen any of the videos on the 120-plus mile gridlock traffic jams, they actually have to take food and water to the people through airlifts and helicopters just to pull them out of this thing because everybody runs out of gas. But in China today, and I've traveled all over China, they've got 50 lanes going one way. I don't know if anybody can even imagine that. 50 lanes going one way, and yet they still add 27 million cars. That was Neil Lester Holt on NBC. They add 27 million new cars to China's highways every year because at 1.35 billion people, the Chinese want to be like Americans, and they are racing pell-mell to do that. But there's no way to keep adding cars and homes in a finite area and hope to have any kind of quality of life. And the fact is, the rivers, like the Yangtze River, which I've sailed on, is an open sewer. And certainly the air pollution in China it's ubiquitous, and it's deadly, and it's toxic, and it causes lung cancer, and it causes emphysema, and it causes all the consequences of acid rain. And, of course, there's a 20,000 square mile dead zone at the mouth of the Yangtze River. So you can see there's no one's really working towards solutions. They just keep powering up the engines of consumption and production, and they're going to pay a severe price in the future.
I think their leadership knows what the problem is, but they don't know how to deal with it. I mean, human desire for reproduction is an overwhelming thing. It just, when I read about it, it says there just nothing stops human reproduction. And that's their problem as much as anyone else's over there. So I'm not really sure myself. I think their leaders know, but I don't think you can convey it to the people as easily.
Well, that's true. At the same time, though, educated countries such as Canada, such as Europe, such as Australia, and such as America have had a 2.03 fecundity or birth rate since 1970. So educated countries like New Zealand, like Australia, like all of the countries of Europe have anywhere from a 1.3 to a 1.6 birth rate. So they chose, and here in the United States we have a 2.03 for the last 40 years per woman of children. And so we did intellectually choose, since 1970 when we had our first Earth Day, we chose to have a stable, sustainable civilization. However, the power elites in Congress that opened up the doors, the floodgates, if you will, Jacob Javits said, let's open up the floodgates, and the rest of the third world kept steaming ahead. When I was in college there in the 60s, we had 3.5 billion people on the planet. Well, now we've got 7.3 billion, growing by 80 million per year, and 1 billion net gain every 12 years, ready to hit 10 billion by the mid-century, and upwards of 14 billion before the century's over. And no one's talking about it. You cannot get onto Charlie Rose. You cannot get on 60 Minutes. They just won't touch all of the facts, the figures that I've sent them for the last 15 years. And so what I'm hoping is that everyone listening today sends a letter to 60 Minutes. And you know the email of 60 Minutes is 60M, as in minutes, 60m@cbsnews.com, and demand, invite, implore, beseech the the CBS 60 Minutes crew and the producers to run a series, or at least a a big expose on what our country faces if we continue on this path and add this next 100 million immigrants legally, and that's not counting the illegal ones, which could add anywhere from 20 to 30 million more. And of course, our own birth rate of it's called population momentum. Even at 2 children per family, we add and are about to add a total of 34 million more in the next 34 years, because we add about 1 million because of population momentum. So as you can see, it has to be you, the American citizen, that writes Charlie Rose and writes Matt Lauer and writes George Stephanopoulos and writes Wolf Blitzer and Brit Hume and certainly John Dickerson on Face the Nation and Meet the Press. The key is either we do that or this thing will be buried, because those in power do not want to stop population growth.
And a little more time, when a little more time passes, I don't know, years, I almost would have to say, you're going to go back to these guys, these Charlie Rose and all these, and they are going to realize, I think we screwed up. I think we didn't see the problem back then. We just wanted to take the easy route. More people, more better, more people, more better. That's what they really were thinking all the time. And therefore they don't want anything to interfere with that. They are also thinking, we want more people listening. Well, that's not all right. We're gonna, in time, it's gonna come back to them. Why didn't you do something back then? Why didn't you call our attention to this overpopulation situation? And by the way, it still comes back to immigration about as much as anything. I'm sure that's still the problem with us.
Well, that's correct. It is totally immigration. If it wasn't for immigration in 1965 being changed to the horrific number of 1.2 million per year, you would not have had the 100 million people added to this country. It would have balanced out, and we would have totaled, because of population momentum, we would have reached equilibrium of 250 million by 1990. But instead, we screamed through that, and we're now at 324 million and growing again by 3.1 million per year. So we either take charge of this as a country, as a civilization, or we are going to pay, our children are going to pay the severe price and the consequences of becoming a new third world country where everybody is struggling for water. They're going to be struggling for energy. They're going to be struggling for resources which are not there, and they're going to be literally struggling for quality of life, which will not be there. Because
right.
I want you to understand this. Once the numbers land on our country, all we can do is suffer under those numbers. There's no solution. And I've heard many sit around and say, well, we've got technology is going to save us. Well, the fact is, technology will not save us, and it will not change the consequences of catastrophic climate destabilization. It won't stop the air pollution over our cities. It won't stop the consumption of energy and coal that then create smog and create air pollution, which then drops on the land and poisons the land, and therefore we won't survive all of the Monsanto GMOs. We won't survive the Weed Be Gone and the Roundup, which is killing all the pollinators. And you kill enough of the bees, you won't have crops to eat. And then when you start creating such poisonous soils, we're now injecting 70,000 different chemicals into the air, into the water, into the land 24/7. At some point, those soils, the air and the water will break down to a point where you cannot recover nature itself or the natural world. And then when you start thinking about the species extinction rates at 250 per year here in the United States because of habitat encroachment by humans, and over 100 creatures worldwide go extinct every single day. That's the Norman Maier Oxford University research project that's been going on for 30 years. You've got huge problems with the ecosphere and our biosphere. You're looking at the oceans being literally contaminated and acidified, if you will, but also they're sucking up all that carbon, and at some point we're literally killing off the oceans, and that's where we have so much of our food supply. So this thing is compounding. It's called exponential growth. It cannot be sustained. It will, in the end, cost us as a civilization, and ultimately, it's going to take this civilization on a road that we don't want to travel.
You know, the oil, taking one thing, you mentioned just energy, but think in terms of just oil. We're going to run out of it. Now they're going to figure out all kinds of ways, fracking, changing coal into oil, things that are not practical. It's so much easier just to have less people. But more important, oil will run out. And people don't realize when the oil was out, does anyone remember what it was like in about 1973 when we were low on gas and there were lines at service stations for blocks? Does anyone not remember that? Think of what it'll be like in the future when the oil is gone.
Well, that's
really
true. And
gone.
Walter Youngquist, the great energy expert, said, and I quote, "As we go from this happy hydrocarbon bubble, we have reached now to a renewable energy resource economy, which we must do in this century. Will the civil part of civilization survive? As we both know, there is no way that alternative energy sources can supply the amount of per capita energy we now enjoy from oil, much less the 10 billion people expected by 2050. And energy is what keeps this game going. We are involved in a Faustian bargain, selling our economic souls for the luxurious life of the moment, but sooner or later the price has to be paid," unquote. That should really put a chill up everyone's spines, because we're not going to escape this Faustian bargain. And no matter how many elites up there and how many corporate heads and all the big capitalists that are pushing for more growth and endless population growth, the Faustian bargain will be paid for by our children. And if anybody is listening tonight and you're somewhere around the age of 30 or 40, you're going to be a part of that Faustian bargain debt that's going to come due as you get to be my age.
Yeah, in other words, when we're going to be out of oil, period. I mean, just driving around the city, endless cars everywhere. Traffic, again, on this page in the front, the Tribune, cars all over. There won't be the oil to supply those. It's just going to stop. Oh, there'll be some electricity. There are different ways to generate electricity. We like to think the dams can do it all, but I don't think they can. They could do it all if there's less people. If there were less people, the dams could probably supply all the energy we need. So that's part of our problem. I really feel that what some of these little people, little babies, that's what they're going to see when they get up to be 30 and 40 years old. Hey, where's the oil that you guys had?
That's exactly correct. As a matter of fact, there was a book out. It's called $20 per Gallon by a guy named Steiner out of Forbes. And he did a report on it, and I did a review on his book.
Okay.
And he said at some point we're going to go to $5 a gallon. In fact, I was in California last summer, and I took a picture of a pump on the Big Sur on my bicycle trip, and it was $5.99 a gallon. $5.99 a gallon. Well, guess what? It's going to go up to $10 a gallon. And ultimately, as it gets harder and harder, it takes more units of energy to get it out of the ground, and then more units of energy to get it, around to all the gas stations. It's going to be $20 a gallon. And so it's going to literally change the way we live and work and eat and play and how we operate. And we caused it to ourselves because we simply kept adding more and more people. And that's because the Congress, back in 1965, not knowing what it was going to do with the consequences, went ahead and created the Faustian bargain. And all of us are going to pay here in the very near future, because when you look at the next 30 years, they're going to go by in a blink, but we will be faced with the consequences. And at some point, they will be irreversible and they'll be unsolvable.
But having less people really will be the biggest step that we can take. And how do we get word to families? In other words, it's whenever I hear someone say, "Well, we're going to get married and have a family," I'm thinking, "Well, wait a minute, wait a minute. How about one or no children? How about that?"
Well,
And
there's a fantastic research done by a Dr. Jack Alpert, and I would encourage each of you listening tonight to go to www.skil.org, skil.org with Dr. Jack Alpert. He's out of Stanford University, brilliant statistician, and he has shown mathematically that we cannot survive the 21st century with the way the oil is being used up. And let me everybody appreciate this. You all might think, well, we're going to have alternative energy, we're going to have technology. Well, here's the reality. Every day now, the human race burns 94 million barrels of oil. 94 million barrels of oil. And that oil, if you put it into your drums, that's 42 gallons per drum, and you have they're 20 inches in diameter, and you made a belt of those oil drums. That oil drum belt would reach around the equator and then some over 29,000 miles. And the equator is about 25,000 miles. The belt of oil would be another 29,000 miles of oil. Those oil drums are filled up every 12 o'clock at night, and for 24 hours they're all burned down. And in fact, not Africa, but China right now, growing at such an extraordinary exponential rate of speed, is projected by 2030, which is only 14 years from now, to be burning 98 million barrels of oil each day themselves. Mm-hmm. So at some point, the Earth cannot and will not give up all that oil. And then the next fact is this. What does that much oil mean? Well, if you take all the oil burned today, it's around 30 billion barrels per year. For the sake of just a visual, that's a block, a metric block of oil of 1 mile by 1 mile by 1 mile. A 1 mile cubed block of oil. That's how much oil is taken out of the earth every year and burned. Now, what does it take to even come close to having a commensurate amount of oil like that? Well, you could build 900. It's actually 9. I think it's 900. 9.1 million solar panels every year for 50 years to equal 1 year of burned oil energy. You could also 32.5 million turbines, wind turbines built. 32,500 wind turbines built every year for 50 years would equal 1 year of oil. 52 nuclear power plants built every year for 50 years would equal 1 year of oil. And, of course, 102 coal-fired coal plants creating electricity built every year for 50 years. That would give you the same power that oil gives us right now. Obviously, there's nothing out there on the horizon that's going to equal the energy release of oil. So we're in a lot of trouble on that thing, Richard, and I hope that was really made clear by those comparisons.
And it's so easily to solve. Just stop having so many children.
That's correct. Well, and stop having so much mass immigration.
That's right, too.
Because, again, the mass immigration is not going to solve the fact that the third world keeps adding 80 million new babies net gain every year.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's their, what's the word for the way they believe, that they need to keep reproducing. That's what's wrong.
It's unlimited fecundity, birth rates, and it's encouraged by the Islamic, all these older religions.
Right.
Certainly the Hindus, certainly the Buddhists, certainly the Islamists, certainly the Christians, the Catholic Church.
Right.
And that's the great tragedy. And the fact is, and in fact, I'm going to quote this from Dr. Otis Graham. He wrote Unguarded Gates, and he said, and I quote, "Most Western elites continue urging the wealthy West not to stem the migrant tide that adds 80 million net gain annually to the planet, but to absorb our global brothers and sisters until their horrid ordeal has been endured and shared by all of us 10 billion humans packed on an ecologically devastated planet, unquote.
Now that's a sarcastic thing, isn't it?
Well, it's a fact. I mean,
Okay.
he
Oh,
said
yes.
it in his book, and I've met Dr. Otis Graham, and the fact is, if we keep adding all of these immigrants to our country, and I would ask all of you to go to numbersusa.org. Roy Beck has 2 videos. One is a 5-minute video showing you how fast, through this gumball machine, he's got gumballs in these vases, and you can see how fast the third world is adding the 80 million net gain per year. So no matter, even if the Western countries took on 10 million a year or 15 or 20 or 30 million a year, it would never solve the third world's addition of 80 million net gain every year. So you can see it simply is not a way to solve the population crisis. What we have to do is stop immigrating so that these leaders of these countries are forced to deal with their populations, because at some point there's no way that Western countries can survive and be the exhaust pipe for all these countries, and so they're going to have to deal with them anyway. It's better to do it sooner than later, because if we do it later, we all become victims. If we do it sooner, then we can actually create our own civilization to be viable and sustainable through the 21st century.
That's right. And there's so many other factors to do with the nationalities and religions that you mentioned that become a part of this. Everything it's so hard to reverse them, and we have to somehow, they have to keep being pointed out by, hopefully, their own people to do and reverse.
Well, you would hope that there's intelligent thought out there by all of these leaders, but the fact is, culture and religion overpower reasoned thought, critical thinking, rational action, and just luckily, here in the United States, the Catholic Church doesn't have a say, and virtually 99% of Catholics use birth control. In fact,
right.
Catholics in America use birth control more than Protestants do. But again, all religions and all people and all races in America have been averaging 2 children or less per family since 1970. So obviously intelligence and education have created that paradigm. The same is in Canada, and the same is in Europe, and the same is in Australia and places like New Zealand. But the rest of the world, as I said, continues to steam ahead with 80 million new babies net gain every year.
That's right. And I think in terms of, we're using 25% of the resources of the world. That's just one more thing that creates a problem, especially for the United States. It's why Dr. Albert Bartlett,
correct,
the one of the, well, shall we say, one of us that care about the future, said that you just can't keep going on like this.
Yeah, there's no question that exponential growth cannot continue. And he said in one of his great quotes, and I knew Dr. Bartlett for over 30 years. We dined together, we spoke together. He came to my programs, I came to his programs. And he said, name one thing on a global or a local level that will be improved by adding more and more humans. Will it make air pollution better and clean it up? Will it make water shortages better and give more water to everybody? Will it improve gridlock traffic? Will it improve the acidification of the oceans? Will it stop the garbage buildup and the plastic that's being tossed into the oceans to create the Great Pacific Garbage Patch? And of course, the answer is no.
Never.
There's
right.
nothing that's going to improve as you keep adding more people, but in fact, it's going to get worse. And here's the quote by Dr. Bartlett. And for those of you who want to follow Dr. Bartlett, and he's passed away now 2 years, www.albartlett.org. That's albartlett.org. And he said, and I quote, "Can you think of any problem in any area of human endeavor on any scale from microscopic to global whose long-term solution is in any demonstrable way aided, assisted, or advanced by further increases of population locally, nationally, or globally," unquote. And of course, the answer is
never.
Never. There's no chance for it. And as a matter of fact, I've also met Dr. Paul Ehrlich at Stanford University.
Oh, yeah.
And he is beyond brilliant himself. And he said, and that's why I bring this up, all causes are lost causes without limiting human population, unquote. And that's why, whether it's the Sierra Club or it's the Audubon Society or it's Greenpeace or the Sea Shepherd Society or the National Bluebird Society or the World Wildlife Society or any and all of these organizations that are purporting to save the environment, all of their causes are ultimately lost if we don't stabilize and, in fact, decline human population, because we are really so far in over our heads right now that the Faustian bargain is going to come down on our children's heads, if not sooner, and cause extraordinary consequences that, as I've said, will be irreversible and unsolvable.
You know, these are huge numbers.
Oh,
but
huge.
the 7 billion that we have now, we really, I mean, to make it round numbers, we need to get it down to 1 billion. And when we bring in 1 billion people in a 12-year period, that's just too much. We have to go back. We got to do something to bring that back to where we were. Planet can't sustain us. There just isn't enough planet.
That's correct. As a matter of fact, Dr. Jack Alpert, again, who is absolutely brilliant, he said that we in order to maintain what we're doing to the planet right now, this deficit spending, if you will, on energy and water and resources, we would have to have 3 planets
Right.
if we're going to survive. Well, folks, we don't have 3 planets. We've only got one, and it's getting used up and abused and burned up and hydrocarboned up and 70,000 chemicals and chemicalized up now is such a horrendous rate of speed. And you'll see all the reports. I mean, it's like California last year, because of drought, lost 12 million trees, and the year before it lost 12 million trees. And you can look this up. These are facts that have been shown. I've just read them in the in the LA Times and so forth when I was going through. But 90% of the monarch butterflies of California have died off because of Roundup, a weed killer brought to us by Monsanto. And that company doesn't care what it does to the environment, whether it's GMOs or whether it's the Roundup or Weed Be Gone or any of the chemicals that it goes out and kills the natural world. And so either we take action or those in power will continue to usurp the natural world and create the consequences that we're all going to be facing, especially our children.
Bend over and pick the weed out of your driveway.
Exactly.
That's
just
really
pick the weed.
all you need to do.
That's all you need to do. You just pick the weeds yourself.
And don't buy Roundup. It just it'll come back and haunt us.
Well, as a matter of fact, Boulder,
inside
Colorado was the first city, which is north of me by about 40 miles. Boulder, Colorado was the first city in the United States to ban Roundup and all weed killers from sale there in Boulder, Colorado. I'm hoping more and more. Just go down to your own city council, and you can get all the information from the Boulder City Council. Just write them, bouldercolorado.com. You'll get the city council. You'll get the ordinance that they created. Create the same ordinance in your own city all over America. Let's start a new trend. Also, www.justlabel.it.org. Justlabel.it.org passed in Vermont last year, and Vermont now in July will be the first state to literally show the people that anything that's a GMO, and it will be labeled because the governor signed it. And right now, though, of course, Monsanto is suing the state of Vermont for some reason because they don't want to have the GMOs labeled. And the reason for that is because when GMOs are labeled and people know what they're putting into their children's bodies, they won't buy GMOs. Most Americans don't realize when they're buying GMOs, but GMOs are in just about everything, whether it's high fructose corn syrup or 90% of the corn you're eating, or 80% of the what is it, soy that you're eating. We now have GMO salmon. These things are grave consequences to the world, killing the pollinators off, and things like weed be gone, and then you have the GMO grains and corn that are meant to withstand the Roundup itself, which is a chemical. So there's chemicals inside of the corn kernels and the wheat kernels and so forth. So you can see this thing's getting very complicated, and it's destroying the natural world. And have your state literally have a GMO labeling so we can stop the really amoral CEO and his colleagues there at Monsanto, because they don't care about you or your children or the natural world.
That's right. You know, just for example, lobsters, we had to have a complete stop on the fishing of certain things here on the Oregon coast. That just had to be because of toxicity. And that would, they said you can't do it. You just can't feed the lobsters to people. There's too much going on with them.
That's correct. Well, even in the Chesapeake Bay, right there on the East Coast, the Chesapeake Bay, you can't eat the oysters from the Chesapeake Bay because they're so poisoned. And the same thing holds true in the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, the Gulf of Mexico has been poisoned by that oil well, and all that oil is just sliding around the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico and slowly dissipating. But you also have the Mississippi River, which, by the way, folks, I have paddled the Mississippi River from the beginning in Lake Itasca, where it was only 6 feet across and 12 inches deep, then turns into a 2,552-mile river, and then opens into the Gulf of Mexico. And it's so loaded with chemicals and fertilizers and phosphates and sewage and trash and garbage and filth and chemicals of all kinds, fertilizer runoff, pesticide runoff, you name it. There's a 10,000 square mile dead zone right there at the mouth of the Mississippi. Can you imagine what that will magnify to with the addition of another 100 million immigrants to this country and a total population load? And let me make this clear. That 438 million won't stop if we don't stop it by mass immigration. And again, numbersusa.org, the two videos is Immigration, Poverty, and Gumballs by Roy Beck, should be seen by every American. It's 5 minutes long. And then Immigration Off the Charts shows what it's going to look like when we go to, instead of just the 324 million, we'll blow past 438 million, and we'll reach 625 million within the lifetime of a child today. Do you want that kind of a future for your children?
The garbage patch, is that like the one in the Pacific? That's also in the off Louisiana.
Oh, yeah. Let me really have you appreciate that just 20 miles off of San Francisco back in 1947 or so, the U.S. military and the nuclear age dumped, I think it was 500 drums of radioactive waste. And just several years ago, NPR went out and showed where, and it had scuba divers go down there, which is, I'm sitting there going, holy catfish, that's radioactive waste, and you're doing what you're doing. They found all of the drums, the 55-gallon barrel drums, had all opened up and had released all of the nuclear waste into the Pacific, but also into the East Coast and also into the Caribbean there in the Gulf of Mexico. After World War II, they released all of the mustard gas and lucite. Those two gases that were used to paralyze people in World War II were released in specific point. And you can look it up. Just look up for the mustard gas release and the lucite after World War II. It's right there on Google. You can find it. And then think of all of the Fukushima with all the hundreds of millions of gallons of radioactive waste coming from there. That's now circulated around the world. And then if you add what the Russians have done with all of their nuclear waste, and possibly the North Koreans and any nuclear country, you know that nuclear so we are poisoning our world at a prodigious rate of speed, and with more population, it can only accelerate that poisoning of the planet.
We haven't even talked about Fukushima yet, but I know from what you've seen and talked about that it's all over the world.
It's all over the world. That is a fact. There's no way to get around it because the world's oceans all circulate into each other, and so Fukushima is now all over the world.
There's no other way to get around it. It's
No.
So there's a garbage patch down in Louisiana in the Caribbean.
Well, let me give you some, because I did a story on this, and I did a 15-part story on overpopulation, and I talked about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. The Great Pacific Garbage Patch it was 15 years ago when Oprah Winfrey came out with an expose on it, was a giant floating garbage dump of plastic, styrofoam, plastic containers, you name it, floating 1,000 miles off of San Francisco between two of the Pacific gyres. You can call them gyres, you call them gyres, but these are circular patterns that then push all of the plastic into one giant area, and it's the size of Texas, and it's anywhere from 30 to 60, in some places 90 feet deep, just a giant floating island of plastic, all coagulated together, kills millions of seabirds, millions of marine animals, kills, over 100 million sharks are killed every year by humans. 100 million. You can look that up on One Earth by Julia Whitty. And even Life magazine in 1991 talked about 100 million sharks being killed every year. And so you see this damage is horrific, but it's also in the Atlantic. I've scuba dived in all of the oceans of the world, so I've seen the progression of plastics by my own eyes. And the fact is, the Mediterranean has giant, plastic islands. The Atlantic has it. The Indian Ocean has it. And on average, and this is, you can look it up, on average, 46,000 plastic containers float on every square mile of our oceans all over the world right now. And the statistics that I read last year showed that 2.5 million containers are being thrown into the oceans every hour, 24/7, to keep adding to it. And so you can see the consequences continue to grow exponentially.
That was the containers that you were pushing for a deposit.
That's correct.
An
international deposit return law of 25 cents per plastic container. That's what is desperately needed because the human race is doing devastating consequences to the natural world, not only at the top level, but also down in the oceans where plastics are just literally rolling around on reefs, killing sharks. The big 50-mile-long drift nets are cut loose, and those things just keep killing those marine life, suffocating them, killing them, ensnaring them, and they die. And then of course the other animals come to eat them, and then they get caught in the nets and they die. It's a nasty killing machine what humans have created on the oceans of the world.
It's funny. I was just listening to the radio today, and somebody said something about a credit card, and I thought, there's billions of credit card parts down in the oceans around there.
That's right, everywhere.
You just talk about one. You're just talking about one. Now that they're all over. They're everywhere.
Oh, Bic lighters, toothbrushes, every kind of plastic.
Right.
Glasses, plastic, sunglasses, plastic baby diapers, soiled baby diapers. And as a matter of fact, I pick up a lot of trash. I've probably picked up 500,000 pieces of trash on 6 continents in my lifetime. And today, I was picking up a rest area for truckers. And boy, they have a nasty habit of peeing in these gallon bottles or even quart bottles, and then they throw that into the rest areas. And unfortunately, I have gloves. I take care of myself, but I pick up all of the pee bottles and all the trash and all the garbage. But around the world, the human race is just throwing all of this godforsaken plastic trash everywhere on the land and the water and the oceans and the lakes. And there's just no return laws that are doing anything effectively to stop it, and so it's going to continue.
Well, anyway, from what we're trying to talk about is there's still birth control methods that people need to be aware of and put in place, and that's just as important part of our talking about. We can there's too many people all the time, but we need to say, stop thinking about having so many children. By the way, one of my things that always got me is parents that tell their grown children who are going to get married, hey, how soon can we have a grandchild? And I'm thinking, please just don't have any children. Don't try to do anything like that. And everybody wants to keep expanding, going on and on like that. So I'm saying, think about every kind of birth control that you can think of, every way to cut down on the population that you're going to be involved in. And that's the way to make some progress here.
Well, that's correct. And the one thing that I would ask everyone, again, empower yourself. Such organizations as David Durham out in California, www.carryingcapacity.org. There's also www.capsweb.org with Joanne Weidman. That's capsweb.org. That's Californians for Population Stabilization, which is an international organization, very powerful.
Okay.
You also have, of course, the ability to push international family planning with Norplant. Norplant is a 5-year birth control that gets inserted into a woman by her choice, and that will keep her from having babies for 5 years until she's old enough to make intelligent choices. There's obviously birth control pills, which are another aspect. Again, skill.org is powerful. FAIR, FAIRUS.org, Federation for American Immigration Reform. Join these organizations because they're already at like 4 or 5 million. We need 10 million Americans so that you empower yourself to empower these organizations to get those videos out, and so that we can get a national discussion, because all of us are not powerful at all. But when you join numbersusa.org and carryingcapacity.org and capsweb.org, you are joining groups that are just powerful and rational and educated and compelling and run by some people that I respect highly. And again, 60m@cbsnews.com. Tell them that you'd like to have Frosty Wooldridge speak on overpopulation. Who else but a man who's ridden a bicycle over 150,000 miles across 6 continents and seen the consequences? You need to have speakers like yours truly. You need to have speakers like Dan Stein, Joanne Weidman, Dr. Diana Hull, Kathleen Parker, certainly a Roy Beck, who is absolutely brilliant. The key is, and then David Durham, there's a David Paxson at worldpopulationbalance.org. We have to get this conversation, this debate, this discussion to the very highest levels of the media here in this country, on NPR. We've got to get to Robert Siegel. We've got to get to Terry Gross. If you go to the websites on Facebook, you'll see my Facebook page, Frosty Wooldridge, on Facebook. I write Terry Gross weekly with my columns, and you'll see my columns on my Facebook page. I flat tell Terry Gross. I've sent her personal letters. I've sent letters to Leanne Hansen. I've sent them to Steve Inskeep and Robert Siegel, and they won't do anything because they don't get enough information or response from American citizens. So each of you take advantage of what we're sharing with you tonight and in further interviews, and get this thing to the forefront of the country so that we can have a viable and sustainable future for all of our kids. And this is black, white, brown, red, or yellow. We're all in this together. This whole issue has nothing to do with race. It doesn't have to do with color. It has nothing to do with creed or ethnic group.
Politics.
It has to do with all of us surviving in a viable civilization.
Nothing to do with politics either.
It doesn't have anything to do with politics either. That's right.
We're going to push each other off the edge of the earth if we don't do something. And all we have to do is just cut down on the number of people.
That's correct.
By not having them born, people have to realize you can't go on and have a family. You just think in terms of, at the very most, one child, preferably none. Right now, it's more of a crisis from the standpoint of having so many people on Earth.
Well, that's correct. And Arnold Toynbee, the great historian, said this, and this will put a chill up your spine. He said, and I'm quoting, "The U.S. will set a record in the rate of rise and fall of an empire. Between wide open borders and the fall of the dollar and growing population against a declining resource base, the U.S. will be defeated from within. Mobs will rule the streets in a nation that is now the third largest and fastest growing country in the world and unable to support its population except by taking resources from other countries," unquote. The fact is we can't even survive with all the other countries, but at some point they won't be able to survive to even give us their resources. We import 7 of 10 barrels of oil every day right now. And so Arnold Toynbee, the historian, sure gives us a chilling, if you knew you were a citizen on Easter Island and you had children, wouldn't you want to change the course of Easter Island's history or the Mayan Empire or certainly the Roman Empire or the Persian Empire? All these great empires fell because they simply overloaded their carrying capacity and could not sustain their citizens inside and within themselves.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Frosty, I want to thank you very much for calling in and providing this great conversation. I just had to take a moment to go back to my newspaper here. City choked by traffic congestion. It means city choked by overpopulation. People need to start using different words when they say not having so many children and just doing something. But in any event, I want to thank our crew. And could you go ahead and put up the schedule for replay, and that'll take care of us for this part. Oh yeah, great. Okay. And thanks again, Frosty, because I think that was great.
My pleasure. This last quote is by Dr. Albert Bartlett.
Go ahead.
"Unlimited population growth cannot be sustained. You cannot sustain growth in the rates of consumption of resources. No species can overrun the carrying capacity of a finite land mass. This law cannot be repealed and is not negotiable," unquote.
Do people understand that the end of the earth is not negotiable? We're just there. Well, okay, I think we've gotten to the end of and we're going to go. The second portion will be Bruce Broussard, and he'll have some politician coming on here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Welcome to this segment of the Oregon Voters Digest. I'm Bruce Broussard, your host. Welcome again. As you know, we're right in the midst of election here in the city of Portland, Oregon. We're going to have quite a show tonight, folks. In all due respect, I've got a long-standing person that I've been knowing for a number of years. In fact, if anybody knows issues, she probably tops me on those issues. But we also include solutions to those issues. I'm talking about Miss Lenita Duke. Lenita's been around issues for, as far as I'm concerned, all our life, including family.
That's high praise.
But this is going to be great because I'd never known that she would be interested in running for office, and so not only are we going to get the answer as to why she's running, but we really appreciate the fact that she is, because as you know, we are sort of in a crisis kind of an environment here at this point in time. Our youth are having major problems, our education system, safety in the streets. I mean, just on and on and on and on. And so it's going to be a pleasure to interview her and give you the opportunity to understand where I'm coming from, because I've always maintained that, especially I've run for office on a number of occasions, there's some things I've learned, and they will give you just enough time within 2 minutes to come up with not only the issue, but also a solution. And you just can't very well articulate an issue and at the same time talk to a solution. And that's really one of the problems. Hopefully we might be able to change that at some point in time, where maybe the filing, if you will, would be in such a fashion where a person would be required, if you will, to at least identify an issue on the filing form and at the same time identify a solution. And then that'll kind of give folks the opportunity to know exactly where these folks are and help the media. The media really needs help, because otherwise it's just a bunch of trivia. Mm-hmm. And it's not really talking about the main issue. So I'd like to introduce you. Thanks for coming. Appreciate that.
Welcome.
This is great. This is great. Well, let's because we got enough time.
Okay.
We're going to have enough time.
Okay.
And I want to make sure that they're giving you the opportunity to let the public, let the voting public know who you are, because like I said, you go back a long way dealing with all these issues. So let's talk a little bit about Lenita.
Well, my name's Lenita Duke, and for years, I'm news director and producer of Grassroots News Northwest.
Yes.
I'm a video educational producer. Ironically, I spent the 1990s here at Cable Access, when it was called Cable Access. What is it called now? Portland Media?
Portland Media, PCM, Portland Cable Media.
Okay, well,
right?
this was back in the day in the 90s. And I learned a lot of my audio and video skills here. And prior to that, since 1979, I was a broadcaster on cable community radio. So
yeah, right.
I have a background in independent journalism. Mm-hmm. And it's that background that I was able to cover many issues mm-hmm. affecting Portland's inner northeast
right.
area, mm-hmm. and then larger issues such as economic development. I've always been a fan of education. In fact, you know, Ronnie Herndon would kill me if I did not constantly
yes.
address the
yes.
academic discrepancy
yes.
that exists here in Portland.
Right.
We have an achievement gap, and what that means and the way it manifests itself through a child from kindergarten all the way through high school. So let's say, and it's not just African American children, it's not just children of color.
Right, that's right.
If you graduate from the Portland Public Schools and you find yourself then at PCC, mm-hmm. and you take a placement test to find out where you are in math and mm-hmm. English and writing, and you'll be surprised to find out how much you do not know. You'll be surprised to find out that you need remedial classes. Mm-hmm. And I hear that a lot, and the problem is that you spend all your financial aid your first 2 years at community college taking remedial classes, that by the time you're in your second year of community college, you're just at 100 level classes, which are transferable classes. But guess what, Bruce? Your financial aid is gone.
Oh, wow.
So unless you know how to play sports really, really well, unless you can bounce that ball with flavor, you're going to have some trouble. And I think that's why we have so many people who drop out of school. School is very daunting. I went, and I know this because I went to PCC, then I went to Marylhurst University, and I could say that the study that I had to undergo at PCC was much more rigorous than at Marylhurst College or Marylhurst University. So A lot of people, they go to community college and they transfer to a university. And again, the problem is that by the time you take transferable classes, 100 level classes, 200 level classes, all your financial aid is gone.
Yeah, yeah. Well, look, let's go back a ways since I'm gonna take advantage of this situation. You mentioned Ronnie aspect
Oh,
of it.
yeah, I love Ronnie
And
Herndon.
Ronnie has
Just
been
love him.
very much. He was very, very much involved in education.
Yes, he was.
But
Yes,
he was there.
And he still is.
And
He
he still
still
is at the
is,
beginning. In
yes.
fact, we're going to get him on the show.
You have to get him on the show.
You got to get you got to
Absolutely.
get back in the deal because he jumped in there. And when I think about him, I think about whom I think Reverend John
right?
Jackson. He recognized
Reverend John
that.
Jackson,
Yeah, John
the Black
Jackson,
United Front, organizing people of the faith community
Yes,
and regular
exactly,
folks.
exactly.
I mean, to me, he was a sterling leader.
Well, the Head Start thing. That's what I'm saying about. Let's go back a
buying a
minute
Head Start,
because
okay.
he noticed then. He noticed, i.e., the difficulties, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
the whole issue of the system. Because you would think that during those formative years, the idea is that once you've gone through this educational cycle during the formative years, you're ready now for the world.
Mm-hmm.
But the recognition on that front end that was very, very much important in getting it, i.e., Head Start. Remember that one?
Yeah.
And Head Start, with in all due respect, was in the churches.
It started.
It was in the
yeah,
churches. Started right there in the
churches,
churches
right.
with and then with the parents and this, that, and the other. And then John got involved. Naturally, John got involved in the deal. And then all of a sudden, this thing all evolves.
Well, let me just do
Talk
a
to me a little bit
simple
more, yes.
correction. You know, I have a degree in history, okay?
Right. Okay. Go on.
History and culture. So Reverend Jackson and Ronnie Herndon and the Black United Front,
Right.
their first issue that they tackled was education. And what they did, there was a busing program here in Portland, Oregon that bused African American children to Hayhurst School, to different schools, just so that there'd be one person of color in the classroom. Now, this was during the 80s. So that was an extremely unfair busing program, and they bused children for no reason other than because of the color of their skin. So it took the efforts of the Black United Front, Ronnie Herndon and the faith community, and a number of other community activists. In fact, that's where Avell Gortley got her start, too, as an activist. It took all that effort. There was a boycott May 19th, 1980. And it was the day that it was right after Mount St. Helens blew, because I think Mount St. Helens blew May 18th, 1980. And then I do have a good memory. And then there was a school boycott. And not only did people of color keep their children home, but overall many families kept their kids at home because they felt that that was an unfair busing program. And it took people like that, activism like that, to dismantle that busing program. And I covered all that as a reporter.
I know that.
So those were exciting times. And then to do all that, to sort of take back your community, and then bam, guess what happened? Crack cocaine came into the neighborhood. Now, I don't know about you, and I was making a speech a couple weeks ago, but I can't grow crack cocaine in my backyard. I grow daffodils right now. I got my tulips and my phlox coming up, but I can't grow crack cocaine. So crack cocaine was brought into the community. And people got sprung on it. So there was not that sensitivity. Now there's an epidemic of meth and heroin. We call it heroin, right?
Yep.
So there's a concern now about treatment, getting access to treatment, treatment on demand. Well, back then, they dealt with drug addiction in the black community as a criminal justice issue. So that's why we have that crime bill, and we have a rise in incarceration. And you hear a lot of people talk about the disproportionate number of African American males incarcerated over a couple of vials of crack cocaine. But it just destroyed our community. And what bothered me is that you had people who just got out of poverty, just buying their first home, their family wealth tied up in their property. All of a sudden, I'm not talking about grandparents now, but all of a sudden, their grandkids come along and they turn that beautiful home into a crack house.
Yeah.
So raising my family, it appeared and it seemed like there was a crack house on every block. It seemed like that way. It was probably a crack house on every few blocks, every couple blocks. But it was devastating to us in the 1980s, and property values plummeted. and there are people that say that it was allowed to plummet. And what went on, and I went back east a couple times. I won a bunch of journalism awards. So I would go back east, and I would see the same thing in Harlem happening there as it happened here in so-called Albina, where you right next door to downtown, easy to get to the airport, centrally located, prime piece of property, plummeted because of crime and drug abuse.
And then there's Rico. Rico came in during that
Rico
particular time.
came as a
That's right,
reaction
that's right.
to it.
Exactly, exactly.
How
a lot
do
of
you
folks
deal
moved
with
there.
it?
And a lot of folks lost their homes.
They lost their
You got
homes.
me?
That's right.
And I can still remember when the guys were buying. Well, folks were buying. Guys who were basically pushing. Because, like you said, it wasn't manufactured in the community.
Right.
It came into the community aspect of it. But a lot of the things were confiscated. Remember that?
Yeah, but you know, at the same time, this neighborhood was redlined,
Yeah, right. Exactly.
and that I could get a loan from a bank to buy a Cadillac, but I couldn't
That's right.
refinance
That's right.
refinance my
That's right.
home
That's right.
because these banks were not
Yeah.
giving loans to people that lived in certain zip codes. That your insurance, your homeowner's insurance, was higher if you lived in certain zip codes. So this area was redlined, and the property values plummeted. Then all of a sudden, developers took a look at it and said, "Hey, this is
remember
prime real estate."
Well, I remember that real well because I was kind of like gotten into the business with the plumbers, and we were actually basically doing a lease option purchase aspect of it. And then all of a sudden, Habitat for Humanity came in and put us out of business. I mean, I'm just saying, but my point is that the idea was to push home ownership, but that wasn't into the cards. The other thing that I want to ask you about, and I'm sure you've done some work along that line, the voc ed situation. You had Benson, but they would never expand Benson to fit all the rest of the schools in the Portland Public Schools. Is there any thought, any?
Well, my daughter went to Benson, and
Okay.
she didn't want to go. She wanted to go somewhere else. But I wanted her to go to Benson because I wanted her to get a good
Okay,
technical
yeah.
education. I wanted her to take advantage of the voc ed part of Benson. And she was there for about 2 years. And it's that combination of training and vocational education that you need. You know, I work with so many people just getting on the computer. To many people, they're afraid of it because it's a foreign kind of thing. They're not used to it. And it goes back to education. You have to be able to read and write very well.
That's right.
You have to be able to follow a set of instructions. Even in video production, I'm just humbled by how fast things have changed. When I started down here, we edit linearly, where you have a beginning, middle, and end. And we used to edit on an edit board. And now things are done in the computer with certain software. You just load it in, and it doesn't have to be linear. You can finish the beginning at the end of the video production, and you can do the middle somewhere else. And that's what we call nonlinear editing. Now, to be able to do that, you have to be familiar with computers. You can't be afraid of it. And you have to have the ability to learn and internalize the learning. And then everything you've learned, you have to be able to top it off with something else because everything you've learned now is obsolete.
Yeah.
This technology is just crazy.
Yes. Well, you know, that's why I make that point about voc ed and why it was so important, because it developed the enthusiasm, if you will, and the motivation, if you will, to want to learn. As you said, the reading, writing, and arithmetic aspect of it. But with that not being there, all of a sudden now you're sitting in a situation where young people have nowhere to go but the criminal justice system.
Well, no, I
And then
disagree
another
with
life.
that.
Talk to
I
me. Talk to
disagree
me.
with that. That's not the only place where they can go.
Okay.
All right.
Well.
That is not. I'm not going for the okie doke. That's not the only place they can go, Bruce. What's wrong with you? They can do other things.
You haven't changed. I like it. I like it. Good
There
on.
are other options
What are the other?
out here.
Give me some options.
Well, you're a military man.
Oh yeah. Well.
Yeah.
That's
I
right.
think the military is a vital alternative for some men and women, young men and young women who have the discipline to survive basic training.
Well, that's the ultimate voc ed. See.
Yeah, that
Input-
is the ultimate focus. At the
Input,
same
output,
time,
and throughput. See what I'm
They're
saying?
training
Oh yeah,
programs,
very
and then
much so. Oh yeah.
I have to give props to my grandmother. She was autodidactic. You know what that means,
But hey,
bro?
now you're the educator. I mean, tell me
not
about
an
it. Tell me
educator.
about it. Tell me about
My
it.
grandmother had the ability, and she taught me these skills. You have to have the ability to teach yourself. If you're interested in a certain topic, like you've always been interested in audio and video production. So you're able to pull all this together. Now, you don't have a degree in this, do you?
Nope.
But you have the ability to teach yourself. So I think young people, they need to have options. They need to have people that can light a fire under them. They can have the ability to teach themselves. I saw a young man, and I have a background in social service, saw a young man I used to work with, and I asked all young people this, especially those that enter the juvenile criminal justice system. I said, well, is there anything we could have done to stop your behavior? And it just breaks my heart because 9 times out of 10, they say no. This is something I had to do. I said, okay, I'm listening to you. I'm trying to learn. So tell me why. Why would you turn us down? And the cat gave us props, all the social workers props, and said, you guys did the best you could. I, as an individual, was not listening. And I asked him, well, why? And he said he didn't want to. Based on his background. He said he grew up too quickly. And it's odd that we're having this conversation because I met this young man today. And one of my campaign platforms is bring back community policing. Bring community policing back so you know who you are, who's in this neighborhood. You know Jamal, you know Jose, you know Alicia.
That's the way it was, you know.
Yeah,
at
you
one
know
point in time.
Moesha, you know these
that's
children,
right, exactly.
and you know their parents.
Yep.
And you're able to ameliorate some of this petty criminal behavior that we're being subjected to again. So, you know, we talked earlier about the Bureau. If I win, and I want to win, you know, if I don't win outright, I want to force the incumbent into a runoff. I would like to take the police bureau, and I would like to bring back community policing.
What's your definition of community policing from your perspective?
Again, where you know the people that you're policing and they know you. I'm going to tell Officer Johnny, you said that, you know, where people know you.
But
where
we were
you
doing
have an
that. We were doing that
understanding.
at one point in time.
Well, at one
what
time,
happened? What
I
happened?
think the priorities changed. That's what happened. The priorities
Like what?
changed. People retired. People no longer knew. You know, I used to hang out with Chief Moose up here at the
Well, first African American chief, right?
first African American chief.
for
I
the
used to
police.
hang out with him up at the King Neighborhood Facility. There was this table in the middle, and I would be there. Edna Robinson would be there.
Yep, all
Sharon
of them.
McCormick would be there. Gail would be there.
Don't
and
forget
we used
Gloria.
to sit.
Don't forget Gloria.
I'm not going to
Yeah,
forget
yeah.
Gloria. I apologize. Don't want to forget anybody. Ronnie Herndon would come up there. And he would get a flavor for the community. He'd be able to see people. We would have meetings with the police and various police officers. And I think Ronnie Herndon and his organization, the Black United Front, helped the police to the extent that they were able to identify problems. Look, we got this crack house over here. Miss Johnson can't get to sleep. People running in and out of her house all hours of the night. What can you do, Officer John? Well, Officer John could watch that house, send a couple snitches up in there, close it down. To me, that's community policing.
That's community policing.
Right.
You think that's anything? Would it be current, if you will, in your definition of community policing to date?
Well, I
With
think
the
you still
advent
have
of
to have a
the hiring and all
relationship
this other- yeah.
with the community. You
Okay.
have to have people that the community feels comfortable talking to.
Right.
You have to open at least the door to community policing, and you have to be seen. You can't be in those cars all the time. And it can't be such an adversarial relationship. And that's why we have this whole issue with Black Lives Matters, you know. When the police stop me, I kid you not, I'm afraid for my life. That's why I drive a raggedy Volvo. For real, because when the police stopped me, I said, oh, officer. And I made a video about this entitled No Drama, How to Have Positive Interaction with the Police.
Well, expand a little bit on that.
Well, when the police stop you, you do whatever they say, you
Okay,
know. And
okay.
the issue is, even when you follow their directions, you still get treated differently. I read and this is a national issue where an African-American woman came out with an axe. Police shot her dead. In the next day, a white gentleman, white guy, he's on his front yard drinking beer. I think he's either naked or almost naked with a knife, and he gets arrested. So when people talk about Black Lives Matter, that's what they're talking about. You treat me with the same respect and dignity because you operating as a state authority. But at the same time, I understand other people that say, well, why don't Black Lives Matter increase what they're talking about, like in terms of, you know, being a parent, how you treat each other. Richard Sherman, that football player, he talked about how, well, you know, Black Lives Matter, the person that robbed me, hurt my family, that was an African American. My life didn't matter to him. So that's a complicated issue. But that's what that means, that whole Black
That whole
Lives
Black
Matter.
Lives Matter, yeah. That's been something that has not, again, as you say, there's sort of a negative kind. It's still sitting at sort of a divide. You know, just recently, Portland Community College came up with a White Lives Matter, and it's kind of gelled and this, that, and the other. But where it's at right now is just sitting on the table now again. And I would agree with you that we need to come together. You got
Oh,
me?
absolutely.
And community policing is very, very important.
Yeah, we need to help the police. They obviously need all the help they can
Yeah.
get. You got young men who full of hatred and self-hatred, and you know, I can't get a job. My car's raggedy. I don't have a place to live. But this other black man who looks like me and I know him disrespects me, so I'm gonna take a gun and pop, pop, pop. Well, that puts all of us at risk. And if you look at it that way, I think that's one way to address it. And plus, I think the police know who engages in all this behavior. Those cats probably are on probation, just got out of jail. You know, they know who's doing this.
Well, let's talk about that a bit, you know, in terms of the folks that have basically gone through that whole incarceration aspect of it. A lot of times they come back, there are no jobs to begin with.
Right.
You know, when they are in sort of that control environment aspect of it, they have the opportunity, if you will, to pick up that GED during that particular time, or maybe even a skill. Remember, they went through that process, but it's an option to them. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it should be mandatory. If they don't have a GED, guess what? They should go to school. I mean, why in that control environment? You know, a lot of times they'll say, "Well, okay, fine, we'll assign you over here to mop the floors or this, that, and the other," and they do it with no problem. Okay. But there's this openness, if you will, to say, well, if you don't want to go to school, you get my rip. And then the other thing is that the fact of the matter is that they've all committed the crime, did the time aspect of it. So if they've got the education aspect of it, some way, shape, or form, they've got to get into sort of a job environment thing. And then I've always maintained the trades are the way to go.
Yeah, I agree.
The trades are the way to
you're
go.
right, Doc.
And they can get the apprenticeship
You're
in
right.
the institution. And in all due respect, the specific trades is labor, because you know.
Well, and at the same time, I don't think the trades should just be for folks who are incarcerated.
No,
I'd
no.
like to see those same trades out here. Furthermore, I'd like
Voc
to see
Ed,
a
right there in the
retraining. You're
schools.
right,
Voc
Doc.
Ed, right there in the
You're
school
absolutely- I like to
system.
see retraining of people over 40 and 50. I hear a lot of folks over 50 who say, or especially those over 60 who say, well, I'm going to retire early
Yeah.
because I don't believe anyone will give me a job because of my age. So, you know, when we talk about job discrimination, no one seems to want to talk about age discrimination in jobs, but it happens. So one of the reasons why I'm running,
Yeah, let's go. Let's talk about
is-
your running.
Okay,
I want
all right.
more. I
You
want
want
more.
more.
There's some other stuff I want more, because I would like to for you to have spent a little time in your writing skills when you were down at the Observer newspaper. 'cause
Right. Well,
you
you
were
know,
covering
I'm a
lot of stuff.
journalist. Yeah,
That's
I'm
right. You were
straight up
covering a lot of stuff.
journalist,
How'd you
right.
get in that business? I want to get into that a little bit.
well, I started grassroots news because there was no way an organization like the Oregonian would hire someone who didn't have a college degree. And it goes back to being autodidactic. So I started grassroots news in 1979. I started writing for the Portland Observer.
Like Gloria was the mentor, so to
Right,
speak.
right. And then I started doing radio with KBOO in 1979. There was a gentleman named J.W. Friday. He would do a
JW.
show
JW still
on
around.
Saturday. He's
I
still
miss him. I
around.
still miss him.
He's a preacher now.
I know that. I know
yeah,
that. I
which
know
is
that.
amazing. So he would do a show and he'd play a lot of popular music of that time.
Right.
And then I would come on and do news. And that's how I got started. And rather than say I'm from KBOO, I'd say, well, I'm from Grassroots News Northwest, because I wanted something for me. And I'm glad I did that, because not only do I have it, my daughter has it, and I have a grandbaby now, which
Wow.
I'm tripping
Well,
about. Yeah,
congratulations,
thank you very
congratulations,
much.
Congratulations.
Yeah, I always say she came from the planet Venus,
Yeah,
but she
yeah.
lives on the planet Earth
Wow,
with us.
awesome, awesome.
But she's able to have Grassroots News too.
Oh,
So
really?
for
Okay,
us, it's a
cool.
family business.
Oh, cool.
And yeah, I just
You
started.
should have brought
by
her on.
doing
You
it.
got to bring
Well,
her on. You know, I mean,
they
let's do
live
that
in
next time
they
around.
live in Pennsylvania.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, because I believe in that
Okay,
two-parent
grandma,
family.
okay,
So
grandma, okay, good enough.
anything to maintain the family.
Okay, but let's talk
but
about
yeah.
Okay. But let's talk about now your race. Now, first off, why now?
You know, I
Why
was
not?
downtown. I was pitching an idea. This is a true story. I was pitching an idea to the Portland police about doing another no drama, how to have positive interaction with the police.
Right.
Because I really believe in community policing.
Okay.
And the nice thing about being an independent journalist, I can make things happen.
Yep.
It affects a small amount of people, but I can still make things happen. I want to make things happen now for the entire city. So I'm down there. I just left the police department, pitching my idea. I walk down the street, and lo and behold, there is a tent on the sidewalk next to an empty building. And I'm thinking, there is something wrong with this picture. Here you have people, human beings,
yeah.
sleeping on the street next to an empty building in downtown Portland, 1 block from the police department. I was incredulous. So that's why I decided to run.
Okay.
And then I've had people come to me and say, you know, Lenita Duke, you have name familiarity. You know, I am not perfect. Lord knows I'm not a perfect person. But they say that you should run. You should think about running. I said, well, you know, I should, shouldn't I?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think timing had a lot to do with it, and seeing that, and the whole issue of affordable housing. I think I can really address that issue. And there needs to be some creativity applied to that issue. For example, I think we should use some of our lottery money, our lottery funds, on developing affordable housing. And the whole issue of affordable housing, it's not just a Multnomah County, Portland, Oregon issue. It's a statewide issue. And those lottery funds are statewide money. All it takes is a legislator to write it up, bam, vote on it. This is a real problem. Back in the day, and you know, I've been in Portland since the dinosaurs roamed the earth, right? Been here all my life. But I tell you, my first crib, I lived on top of stuff, you know? I used to live on top of a Cleaners, and then I lived on top of a bookstore. And I could get a crib for a couple $100 a month. And I didn't have to go to the government to sign up for, you know, Section 8 or Housing Authority. I was just able to do that. And now those options are gone. There are no like real inexpensive places that's safe and clean to live.
Well, you got to remember something now. You remember we've gone through the baby boomer situation, right?
Okay.
And the baby boomers now are seniors, right?
Right.
And they've got their kids, and baby boomers, a lot of kids. A lot of folks went to school, you know, and then we progressed, if you will, to a certain degree. And all of a sudden, the income level for that particular group has grown so fast. And so they've sort of the left behind folks to a certain degree that wasn't part of that progressive entity aspect of it.
Now, I don't see the income going up. I see the income going down. I see the kind of high-paying jobs that people get. Very few people are getting
The high
them.
tech parts, yeah.
Yeah, high-tech people
Yeah,
are
high tech. Oh,
getting
yeah.
it.
Oh, yeah.
You read where different startups are getting millions of dollars,
Yeah.
and yet
Yeah.
you have this family can't find a place that's less than $900 a month, and their monthly income is $1,000. So what does that do for economic development, Bruce? No, for real.
Well,
You spend all your money on finding a place to live, buying some food, and that's it. And another issue that's going to sock it to the voters here in the city of Portland, their utility bills. It's not getting any lower. It's going to get higher, in fact.
Well, I think that's the importance, if you will, of getting the right leadership, if you will, with city council in those kind of arenas.
Well, I understand you're
really
running for
communicate.
mayor.
I'm running for mayor on the same format that you're talking about.
You're running for community policing and affordable housing.
That's right. The homeless aspect of it. And again, my thing is making sure that people are at the table. And we've developed, if you will, as far as I'm concerned, we got 100 neighborhoods or so in the city of Portland, and we've got 7 neighborhood associations, which is a composition of some of the neighborhoods, if you will. But again, a lot of those folks are just sitting around the table talking about their issues, but that particular area doesn't necessarily have the same issue as another area. They all vary to a certain degree, but they're all in one pot right now. And it's very hard. And depending upon whether or not your money or your power aspect of it, that's what tends to get at the top of the entity aspect of it.
Okay, so you're talking about at-large voting. And in the city of Portland, we have at-large voting. And we have a mayor and 4 city commissioners. Now, I'm running for city commissioner, position 1. I'm running against Amanda Fritz.
Right.
Now, you're talking about what they call single member districts, where the representation is broken down by district, and I agree with that. I think that in the future, Portland needs to reevaluate, should we continue with at-large voting? And I think that we've grown beyond that. If we had single member districts, some of the issues that we're facing now would have been addressed. The whole issue of affordable housing and people experiencing homelessness, that has always been a sore in the city of Portland. But now the sore is infected. It's gone from Burnside. Remember, there used to be just a few blocks on Burnside. It used to be a Mississippi Street. And then all of a sudden it's spread out. And one of my other issues is to make sure that the city of Portland doesn't dump in East County the way they treated inner Northeast Portland through displacement and gentrification. And the real issue that those people that are making bank, that can afford their mortgage and have, disposable income after they pay all their bills, that's a wonderful thing. But this whole issue of people not being able to afford to live, people not having any disposable income, the whole class issue, Portland has to address that. Portland's never had to address that up front. They've had to address it on the QT, but they've never had to address it up front, and now they have to address it. And I want to address it. You even said bringing everyone to the table.
Yeah, that's exactly what you've got to do.
And now ESCO is going, broke my heart. ESCO, remember that manufacturing?
that was
They are going out of business.
Yes,
what kind of manufacturing job that pays $70,000 a year to heads of household, mainly males heads of household, is leaving Portland? We should be out there protesting, getting them to stay.
Well, as one would say, we've developed the world, we've educated the world, and many of those folks went back to their homeland, like China and whatever, and everything you see when it comes to metal and the other, guess what? Made in China. You see what I'm saying? So nowadays, the entities outside of our country, for that matter, are basically, when they order something now, they said, okay, fine, this is how we're going to order. The raw material is going to come from us, and we're going to bring it over to you. Or in most cases, we're going to take the raw material, and it's going to China, and we're going to use our labor force to do that piece. So we've got to be a little bit more creative, and that's why I'm saying that a person with your background and folks like that, with reference to your background and all, because you've been dealing with issues so much, and as part of dealing with those issues, you have to come with solutions. You just can't just sit there and talk about these issues. I mean, you got to be able to come with some form of solution. That means you got to get folks together to agree, to understand that, hey, look here, we got to have jobs here.
Well, I just wonder why no one from the city went to ESCO and tried to keep that.
Well,
and that's not the only manufacturing plant that Portland has lost.
That's right. Well, in all due respect, you're right. I mean, you just can't, and we are getting an influx of folks in this city, big time. Okay, but where are the jobs?
Yeah, where are the good paying jobs?
And where are the good paying jobs?
I can always ask you, do you want to supersize that?
Yep.
But there are we need other kinds of higher paying jobs. I think affordable housing wouldn't be a crisis the way it is now if we had jobs paying $20, $25 an hour, where you can afford rent $1,500, no biggie, and you still have $1,000 left at the end of the month for disposable income, so you could, enjoy your life.
And we got to motivate employers, because it's like anything else. They got to be able to make a profit.
I don't have a problem with that.
They got to be able to make a profit, and so the idea is one has to be articulated enough to be able to understand it, so that when they're dealing with employers outside of our city, for that matter, they got to understand. They got to make sure they're dealing with the right employer. So that the dollars match up with, as you say, with the income, Because if it doesn't, you're giving away too much. Because you're basically making deals with businesses, saying, "Hey, look, why don't you come to the city of Portland? Here are the benefits, etc." But at the end of the day, is that am I making 3%? Am I making 4%? Am I being able to make a living at the same time
Well,
and make a
we
profit for my
certainly-
efforts?
You and I are both capitalists.
Oh, yeah,
I've
oh, yeah,
never.
oh, yeah,
I
oh, yeah,
believe in
oh, yeah,
progressive capitalism.
But people need to understand that.
Yeah,
See, a
they
lot of
do.
times, you see a business and all of a sudden it's just, well, gee whiz, we need to boycott this. We don't like this, that, and the other. I'm involved with the situation on Foster Road aspect of it. That's a major issue out there. You got businesses along the boulevard aspect of it. Folks want to change things. They want to change their lifestyle, bike lanes, this, whatever, whatever. But the fact of the matter is, you got to make sure you give consideration to the employee
I agree.
that's sitting there.
Look what's happening to what is that? Precision Cast
Yeah,
Parts.
oh, yeah,
They've
oh,
been
yeah.
in the city for
Yeah,
years,
yeah,
providing
yeah,
jobs, and now because of the affordable housing issue, you have the housing encroaching upon an industrial area,
Mm-hmm.
and now people are saying, "Well, there's chemicals in the water." Well, that's because you're right next to a
Yeah, or
manufacturing
chemicals in the air,
plant.
right? Exactly.
Chemicals in the
but
air.
consideration should have been given at the time when they did this piece to
Right.
make sure that houses shouldn't be as close
Yeah.
or whatever.
But we
or
still
the
need
filtering system.
businesses
Oh, we
like
need businesses.
Precision Cast
You
Parts.
need businesses.
Absolutely.
And if they're running away and right up front with it, every city in this state in the country are vying for that kind of business.
Yes, they are.
So you know what I'm
Yes, they
saying?
are.
They're looking at the schools for their kids. It's like anybody else. But the bottom line, if they're an employer, we want to keep them motivated enough
Right.
to come to this city and
And stay
expand
here.
and stay here
And stay here.
stay
Hire
here.
local people.
and stay
It's
here.
another issue I have with the city that when you, in their procurement, when they give out contracts, make sure those contracts go to local businesses because that dollar stays in the community. Even if they have to create something locally to get a material completed, let that stay in the community. I'm sure there was a local business that could make those little parking meters that charge you $1,000 a minute to park.
Oh yeah.
They could have done that. That money could have stayed in this community.
But a lot of times, if you look at the stamping at the bottom of the plate of that, it says "Made in China" or "Made in Taiwan" or this, that, and the other. And so I guess that's why it's so important to get the right leadership in the city council, people like yourself, and maybe but because we got the background. I've been in construction for a long time.
Well, you know exactly what
I
I'm
know
talking
exactly
about.
what you're
you
talking
set
about.
aside another issue,
exactly.
like the voters pamphlet's going to
Yep,
come out,
yep.
and I list all the things that I'm for. I said to get rid of the Office of Equity that
Yeah.
my opponent is in charge of, because first of all, it's not doing anything.
that's right.
They hired this cat
That's right.
that's just a figurehead.
That's right.
He's not doing anything.
right.
It's like, because of institutional racism and sexism and ageism here in the city. But we have an Office of Equity,
Yeah.
and they trot this cat out.
Yep.
And what bothered me, even the Oregonian read an article on it a few weeks ago, said that people were upset with it because here you have a committee, you have citizens involved, and they give you ideas, and you don't do anything.
right.
So just abolish it. It's a
yeah,
waste
yeah.
of money.
Well, another one, I'm sure you can appreciate this also, too. I spent a lot of time in the whole issue of the set-asides.
Okay.
Back when Perrin Mitchell, if you will, basically, that's who basically introduced it. And I met with Perrin at that time, and he said these are very, very important times because they used the highway funds. That's where he was, because he was on that committee aspect of it. And he made it very clear to me at that point in time. He said, Bruce, you got to make sure that you got to get to those primes. You got to understand what this business is about. And
Those prime
start
contractors,
off with the jobs, start off with the trades. But all of a sudden, then naturally there were some entities that basically let's go on and be contractors. We want to be prime contractors. To me that was a wrong move. I mean, people should have established themselves in a specific trade before they got out all of a sudden wanting to be contractors. And so one of the things I was thinking about was that on the whole issue of the so-called monies now, the set-aside aspect of it, because how do you get the system in a fairness way? Well, my thing is that we've got census tract. We go around, identify the number of women, the colors, all that other this, that, and the other. So if you're going to do 10% for women and minorities, then you use the census tract. It makes it easy aspect of it. And if a person does, you see what I'm saying? But when you use the census tract, make sure it's in the trades. Almost going back to voc ed.
Right.
I'm always going back to voc ed.
Well, I appreciate you advocating for the trades. We certainly need the
yeah,
trades.
but you are too, though.
Yeah,
You know
well,
what I mean?
again, you have kids, they can play a video game, but they can't operate basic software to get a job. And you know, these are very concerning issues. That whole, I keep going back to the academic gap and how it hurts us as a city and as a state. And I know it's not in the charter, the city of Portland's charter. They gave education. They like, we're not going to address this issue. We're going to give it back to the schools to address. It's
Was
like
that a good
with
move?
youth.
Was that a good move?
Well, it's just like with youth. They gave the whole issue of youth employment to Multnomah County to address, and then nothing happened. And what George Carlin said, if you want to make sure nothing happens, just set up a committee.
Yep.
So let's set up a committee. Nothing will ever happen. So we don't have youth with summer jobs
Yep,
anymore,
yep,
right?
that's right,
The
that's
city
right.
is not involved in
That's right.
education. And I keep harping, like I said, Ronnie Herndon would kill me if I don't use this platform to talk about the academic achievement gap that exists here in Portland. And it not just, it not only does it hurt children of color, but it hurts all children. And these children grow up, they go to community college, and unless you can play basketball or football or some kind of sports really well, it's going to come back to bite you in the butt. You spend all your financial aid the first 2 years taking remedial classes.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden they say, well, you ran out of financial aid, and you're just now starting to get your academic groove.
Well, what do you think about only the old way was 1 through 12, right?
Yeah, K through 12.
I really think that as far as now this is my thought, is that as far as the formative years, it should go up another 2 years, meaning a person picks up their associate degree when they graduate. So K through 14, let's say. But they could really consolidate some of that stuff and still do K through 12.
I don't know, man.
You don't
Kids
think-
want to get out of school, bro.
Yeah, but I'm just saying you could consolidate some of that and come up with a package at K through 12 where a person picks up an associate degree. We've become so sophisticated. We got these things here. We got smartphones. We got everything. I mean, you can get the entire education over that stuff. Fair?
Well, I think maybe in the 10th grade we should add some vocational education.
Ah.
Because I can't imagine children wanting to stay in high school for another 2 years. I don't want them
No,
to
but I
stay in high
want
school.
voc
for
ed. You know,
Yeah, but and you know they talked about having that at one time here in Portland. They used the model in Germany, an apprenticeship program, and it never flew. They got rid of it. So I think maybe in the 10th grade it'd be a really good
10th, 8th,
time.
I think, because
to
voc ed
bring
my area
in
was about
an
8th grade.
apprenticeship
Yeah, but 8th
program.
grade was my. That's where I was in voc ed.
Yeah. Well, you know,
Yeah,
back
I mean, a lot of
in the
achievements
day,
in
the city of Portland had a youth manpower program
Mm-hmm.
where they had federal money and they would assign an employer to train a youth, and the city of Portland would pay that youth's salary, and they would get some training, and they would be able to develop and build a resume beyond fast food. Now, I'm not denigrating fast food. I think all work is good. But it would be nice, like you said, in 10th grade to add some voc ed and add some computers.
Well, think about it now.
Computer
Think about it at Jefferson High School. They used to have the TJ room. Remember that?
I do.
And all of the burger folks, those retailers and whatever, would actually that's where they would get their employment. And then the kids would be able to eat, make a
Right.
few bucks, learn how to take care of that deal. Right? That's fair.
Right,
See,
right.
so like I said, there's and then I'm getting right back. Ronnie's got to get to the table.
You got to bring Ronnie
gotta,
to this.
you got to give him a call, and because in all due respect, history sort of
It's
gives-
repeating itself.
It's repeating itself,
And it's repeating
and we're
itself
needing it.
with me in a sense that now I spent all those years behind the mic. Now I'm in front of the mic.
Exactly.
And it's a daunting task running, and you know this, running
Oh,
for
it's tough.
political
Oh, it's
office.
not an easy-
Especially if you work. I still work.
Yeah, hey.
I work 2 jobs.
Hey.
And
I'm
it
running a
is
restaurant.
daunting.
I'm
Yeah,
running a
look how
restaurant.
busy you are.
My wife had a hip replacement
Oh, my
aspect of it, so I'm
goodness.
taking care of her too. And,
Good for you.
And I'm
Good
doing
for
the
you.
cooking, and I'm doing all kinds of good stuff. But that's okay.
Good.
That's okay. I feel good about this, people.
Well, you've been doing this for a very long time. You've been very consistent with it. And it's because you are a role model that says, yes, you don't have to be perfect to run for political
that's right,
office.
that's right.
You don't have to feel that you have to tell all your personal business to run for political
You're still
office. You don't have to run up and down the street butt naked to say, look at me, look at me, look at me.
Yep.
You don't have to do any of that. And you hurled all that in by just being yourself, by being consistent, and you run each and every
Oh yeah.
election
And you
year.
learn something.
Yeah, I
You-
mean,
you-
you're
you
so
learn
cool
something.
about it
You
now.
learn something.
And you're not like this Godfather figure where I need to get Bruce Broussard's permission to run for political office. Nope, don't have to do
No,
that.
don't have to do
In fact,
that.
I've surprised a lot of people by running.
Well, I appreciate you being on it. Because
Well,
now-
I'm really
now-
excited because
now I-
my name is the first name on the ballot where
Well,
it says City Commissioner Position 1, Duke. And
that
I
right?
think this is so
well,
cool.
I wouldn't have any problem, if you will, for a bureau as far as police commissioners. See, I wouldn't have to worry about it because I'll have other things to deal with.
Yeah, you have other
Because
things
I'll
to
be
deal
the
with.
downtown guy, making sure that the businesses come here. Got
Yeah.
me? Making sure that we create jobs.
Well, you know, and getting back to affordable housing, you and I talked while we're in the green
Right.
room, so to speak, about now the city needs to start building up.
Yes, yes,
And that's going to change things. We're going to end up looking more like Seattle.
yeah.
You go to Seattle, things are built up.
At least this,
So we
this
need
part
to
of the
build-
area.
yeah, we
this
need to
part of the-
build up.
You know, in fact, it may be a sore spot for
I'm
that
talking
now.
about 6 and 7 stories.
Oh, very much so.
And have one floor dedicated
Yep.
to affordable
Yep.
housing.
Yep.
That's what I'm talking about.
Well, yeah, I agree with you, and there may be business on the
bottom,
on the
yes,
bottom
yep,
level
yep,
aspect
yep.
of it. It just makes a lot of sense, and you know, a developer could come up with a kind of a rendering that would really be nice and neat. I mean, to really think about it, but we got to do it now, and we've got to do it with smart people, not just people just taking the money.
Well, you know, and I have issues with us always looking to developers to solve our problems. We live in the city of Portland. We have a variety of people that own property. We have families who inherited their grandparents' home and they moved to another area, but they still own that home and they use that for tax purposes and to generate revenue. We need to reach out to the person that owns a duplex and a triplex. We need to reach out and work with the smaller developer as much as we do the large developer. They need as much love from the city of
Right,
Portland
right.
as those large developers. We need to look at zoning
Yep.
and be creative in how we use
Well,
zoning
normally
laws.
the that planning bureau is supposed to be that. You know?
Well, that
but
planning-
unfortunately, we got to beef that up. I mean, that's a whole different ball.
Well,
you know
look
what
what
I'm saying?
the planning
Yeah,
bureau
yeah,
absolutely
yeah,
destroyed
yeah.
inner Northeast Portland. That's why we have gentrification and displacement.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there was a time in Portland where a woman could not walk up and down these streets without being propositioned as a prostitute.
Mm-hmm.
Now that happened in my lifetime. And again, although I've been here since the dinosaurs roamed the earth, right? My daughter had to be subjected to that. But again, it took the activism of the Black United Front and the faith community to clean all that up. And this is among the things that bothers me about gentrification is that the very people who cleaned this neighborhood up, they were not able to benefit from the neighborhood when it changed. They end up having to move further east, west, downtown. Many people just left Portland. And they were the ones that were out there marching and protesting to clean this neighborhood up. And they couldn't benefit from
Well, I
it.
think about the villa. Remember the villa?
I do remember the villa. Yeah.
And how they had said that people were going to move back in once they
Right.
get in. But then what happened is that was about a third or 2/3 of them are gone.
Well, they moved in other areas of Portland.
But still, my
right.
point is that they should have that was their home then, and they just clean it up. But it didn't happen that way. But anyway, but my point is that we just all need to get together, and I think we've got some smart people here in this city, smart people in this state, and not look at just the pocketbook aspect of it. That's what I'm saying. We've been there, right? We want to give back.
Well, I'm really
I wanna give
excited
back.
about the May 2016 election. There are a
Yeah.
lot of new people in there, a lot of new faces,
Oh,
a
very
lot
much
of
so.
smart
Yes,
people.
very much
And
so.
the old guard got to go.
Yep.
The incumbents, they got to go. Even if you don't vote for me, the incumbent has to go.
Well, that's the lay of the land now, even from a national perspective,
Yeah,
right?
it is.
No to the politician, and even they could change if they're allowed. My point is that how they were doing business, how we were doing business. That's the it. The individual, all he had to do is just come back to the table.
Right.
That's all, and just and start working and performing. You know what I'm saying? So, what would be some of your statements, your last statements? What about the youth? In fact, one area we didn't touch on: mental illness.
Are you trying to call me crazy?
No,
Because you got to be crazy
no,
to
I'm
run
talking
for
about-
political
you're
office. You got to be a little touched in
I'm
the
talking about the ones
head.
that are still trying to run. No, the mental illness. They constantly bring this up now because,
Mm-hmm.
as you know, at one point in time, the mental illness folks used to be in a housed situation up in the Beaverton area, up in that area. But now they're on the streets. I mean, that's where it is. I mean, it's just basically giving you a pill and going on, et cetera.
Well, in the 80s, there was this push to deinstitutionalize
Right,
the
right.
mentally ill. What happened was they deinstitutionalized them, but the dollars didn't flow where the bodies went, where the people went. So now we have a situation where jails are the new, and I think I said that in one of my candidate forums. The jails are now the new residential mental health hospitals or jails and prisons, and then when they get out, they go back to the street. But what is interesting, and my campaign manager talks to me about this all the time, that you cannot experience homelessness, and the longer you're out there on the streets, you're going to become mentally ill because it's rough out there.
It's rough out there, but I've traveled those streets of late.
Yeah, so we're looking at, so in terms of treatment, the mentally ill, we're looking at treatment on demand. I'm suffering through a psychosis. Mr. Police Officer, please don't shoot me. In fact, the Department of Justice in 2015 came out with a report saying that for people experiencing a mental illness crisis, a psychosis, that when the police are called, they need to be accompanied by mental health specialists. Not, and then just don't shoot them because they're acting a certain way because you feel intimidated. So that's what the Department of Justice found, and found against Portland, to be more humane in how they treat the mentally ill, especially as they go through their crisis. But again, it gets back to treatment on demand, and we look at these agencies providing mental health treatment, you know, Cascadia and the other one. Are they doing a good job? Have they been evaluated? Has the city ever had an opportunity to look at how they're doing, what they're doing?
Right.
And then in terms of treatment, is it just giving meds? Are they just like a pill mill? So, you know, that whole issue is a really big issue, and not just mental illness, just A&D abuse, you know, alcohol and drug abuse.
Right, exactly. And what about seniors like me? I mean, what am I going to do? I mean, after
Well,
a while,
you know, I really
I mean,
feel
are you
for
gonna-
seniors because you have people who
I gotta
lived
remember
in
that.
their
You gotta remember that
lived in
now.
their homes. They're on a fixed income.
You got to remember me.
They
now.
don't have a
You
whole
gotta
lot of
remember me.
hustle.
You got to remember me now.
You got hustle,
You
bro.
got to remember me.
And they've worked all their lives, and they deserve to be able to
Exactly.
walk down
Yep,
the street without fear of
Men
somebody,
and women, men and women both.
sizing them up and thinking they're going to take advantage of them.
Exactly.
Absolutely not.
Exactly.
Absolutely
exactly,
not.
Exactly. We can't forget
So
our
for
seniors.
and you know another thing that I see with seniors, not only are they having difficulty finding employment, they're being pressured to retire early.
Yep.
And the ones that are struggling, I had this great idea. I must say this was a brilliant idea, Miss Duke. I had this idea where people are struggling to pay their mortgage. The city of Portland should set up a pilot program that will help them refit their home so they can have an extra bedroom to rent out. We kill two birds with one stone. We're able to help somebody on a fixed income maintain their property, pay their mortgage every month, at the same time provide a rental to someone.
We got to change that policy, you know.
The city can get,
books.
that's why I said there's no
On the books.
creativity in
Yeah,
any
right,
of this.
right. Well, that's why
and
it's so
there
important.
needs to be. And that's why we need to change the leadership. So vote Duke for city council.
I like it already.
Do
we
I
got-
have your vote?
You got my
Bruce?
vote.
All right.
Well, like I said, I mean, you're making my job a little easier, you know, because in all due respect, when running for mayor, it was a pretty big. It's a big.
Yeah, why'd
task.
you pick mayor and not city commissioner?
Because I'm going to make sure that the 4 commissioners are going to be doing something, see? And then I can do my job better, i.e. getting jobs, getting business to come here.
So what do you feel about the men and women that are running against you?
Well, in all due respect, I'm sort of ahead of the game a little bit. I look at the list. I mean, they're neat folks and whatever, but the bottom line is that I wish they, like I said, on the application on the filing form, they were able to identify their specific issue and also a solution to that issue. Because when I see them in those i.e. gatherings, if you will, they really don't have the time to talk about their issues, because a lot of times the interview is kind of like either trivia or asking questions. They have no background.
I know, you have 3 minutes.
Yeah, 3 minutes. I mean, to solve this problem. Well, look, we got 47 minutes. But hey, you need to vote for this lady. I think she's going to be really good. I think I might have you as police commissioner.
Well, I
Would that be all right
appreciate
with you
that.
on
That
deal?
would be great. Yeah.
And by the way, if in all due respect, sometimes winning can be losing. You will not lose, if you understand what I'm saying. You got to stick with it. Fair?
That's fair, but I don't want to lose. I want to win.
like that. That's why I said it.
do not necessarily want to go into a runoff. It would be lovely if I can win, first round without going to a runoff. But if I have to force the incumbent into a runoff, I'm willing to do that. But I only need one vote to win.
I understand. Nita, it's a pleasure.
Oh, thank you
buddy.
for having
Hey,
me.
thank you,
Bruce
Nita.
Broussard for mayor, Lenita Duke, City Council, position 1.
Boy, she's great. I better have you in my seat.